So I showed everyone that song thinking, oh, it's a minute and a half. It's straightforward. It rips. They're going to dig it. And they played me a Devil Wears Prada song. And they were like, this is how we want to sound.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. I've been, very excited about chatting with this guest today. This has been someone that we have been going back and forth logistically about setting this up, but this has been someone where with some of the coverage of the stuff that's outside of the bread and butter of what scoped exposure is, which is usually the hardcore world. I've had some opportunities where I've been able to expand and go outside and film stuff that's like a little bit more outside, but still within the DIY nature of things. And this guest who's a part of this band has like really caught my attention and has kind of continued to keep my attention, and we've been able to meet up a couple times in Toronto. And when we were talking about doing a podcast together, it just felt like it was a good time to do that, especially in season 3 of the show. So without further ado, I'm very excited to be welcoming Mark of MASSA NERA on the podcast. Thank you for joining me, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
So, Mark, I don't know how familiar you are with the show, but essentially before we get into any music chats, we have to check some beverages, kind of, do a little bit of ice breaking just before we get into the show. So it's tradition for the guests to go first. So tell me what you're going to be sipping on for the episode.
Okay, well, I'm keeping it simple. I have water. That's pretty much all I drink. I have a thermos that my parents got for me. So, that's my choice of beverage receptacle. Yeah, just nice water straight from the Jersey City tap.
Okay, very classic. How many ounces does your thermos hold for you?
Oh, Jesus. 32 ounces?
Okay.
Yeah.
Not like the overboard, 64 or anything, but nothing too too small either.
Yeah, pretty standard. I'm thinking like it does the job.
That pause of like examining how much water, you're like, yep, it does the job. That was much needed.
Yeah. So I guess I'll return the question. Yeah. What do you?
Thank you. Yeah. Sometimes no one officially hands it back to me, so I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. I'm also drinking water myself out of a 500 milliliter aluminum can. So I'm just drinking a Liquid Death. I got a few left that's been stashed up here at my parents' place. So had a podcast just before you, and I had like a coffee bev. So I need to kind of balance the scales here.
Oh, it's so fucking funny. I was with a friend earlier today. Well, last night / earlier today, and he brought up Liquid Death, which I'd never heard of. He was like, "Yeah, there's this drink called Liquid Death, but it's just fucking water." And I'm brilliant. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm not gonna do it right now because it's not gonna be funny. But at the time, I think I thought of some like seemingly witty. Maybe I was punch drunk. It felt witty to me, like faux wrestling style advertisement for Liquid Death, But yeah, this is real synchronicity,
I think so. Mark, before we keep going, Jordan's just saying if you can move the mic just a little bit away from your face. I think we're getting a little bit too many pops.
Sure. Is that better?
I think so. Jordan, how's that sounding for you? Yeah, Jordan says that's good.
Cool. Okay.
Cool. Well, Mark, just two water boys drinking some H2O. Thank you for coming on the show, and cheers to you.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers to you, of course. Here's my thermos. Cool.
There it is. Nice.
Is there
blue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Much clearer than the water in Jersey City actually is. So,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately, but I don't want to talk too much about that.
Yeah.
I got a parking ticket from Jersey City too for parking in front of my own apartment. So Jersey City not getting much love right now. But anyway,
Well, unfortunately, that's the reality that my dude is facing over here. So, but we won't talk about water quality or parking requirements just yet. We're not that deep into the podcast. Mark, for any new guest that comes here on the show, I always like to get a little bit of their heavy music or music origin story. So I want you to take
sure.
me like way back when you were like first hearing whether it was breakdowns, punk, hardcore, screamo, whatever like your path was. Tell me like kind of the first seeds that were planted for you.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, when I started listening to music, I was mostly into classic rock. This is when I was 10. So I mean, I guess what's considered classic changes all the time. But when I was a kid, that meant rock music from the 60s and 70s mostly, right? So The Who, Pink Floyd, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a local station, well, a station local to me called Q1043 that has a 4-hour metal slot or like metal show every Monday.
Okay.
So one evening, I had a little like radio / CD player in my bedroom. I had Q1043 on, and For Whom the Bell Tolls by Metallica started playing. And I was immediately like transfixed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Right.
So that was my first exposure to music that I guess could still nowadays be considered heavy, even if it's pretty entry level. But fuck it, Ride the Lightning is such a great record. I think it holds up, you know?
So were you just like, you heard the toll, like the bell tolling, and you're like, wait, what is that? You kind of turned your head a little bit.
And then they come in and Cliff Burton's like melodic bass lead, enters, and it's just, I really, at that point I hadn't heard anything heavier than Black Sabbath.
Right.
So, which was plenty heavy for a 10-year-old, but still, I, was blown away. And from there, I started getting into bands like, other thrash bands, Megadeth, Slayer, etc. Given that this was 2005-ish, I'm 29 now. So yeah, given that this was about 2004, 2005, nu metal was pretty in still. It was dying out, but bands were still popular. Slipknot was still big. Korn was still big. So, I had a brief nu metal phase, which I'm not going to talk about just because I'm a massive hater.
You're a massive hater. Okay.
There are people who are very like, magnanimous or whatever, and they're like, oh well, music is music, and if you like it, you like it. And I appreciate people who are like that, and I wish I could be, but I'm not. So any musical phase that I have that I find regrettable, I'll just mention it and then move on.
Okay.
Yeah, I was pretty into Slipknot, who, admittedly, I could still listen to their first 3 records and find things to enjoy. I think I was reading about Slipknot on the iTunes music store. I was reading their bio on the iTunes music store, and Mr. Bungle was mentioned.
Okay.
So I got into Mr. Bungle, and shortly thereafter, I have, simultaneous with that, I was introduced to metalcore by my cousins, but like metalcore from that era. So like fucking Avenged Sevenfold, Trivium, not god-awful bands necessarily, but nothing that I would consider like legitimate metalcore, right?
Sure.
So I'm into this kind of like bottom tier metalcore, and I'm into Mr. Bungle, and I'm reading about metalcore on Wikipedia, and the Dillinger Escape Plan's name pops up.
Ah, okay. I'm starting to see some of the key moments here now.
So that was really it. That's like ground zero for me as far as exploring real extreme metal, extreme punk is concerned. This is probably 2007 now. Ironworks wasn't out yet.
Okay.
So Miss Machine was still technically their most recently released full length. I saw their name, saw that they were from New Jersey, saw that their music was listed as mathcore, right? And like that they were into jazz or whatever. So I went on YouTube. The music video for Panasonic Youth came up. I got through 5 seconds of it and turned it off. And I was like, man, is this even music? What is this? I don't know if I could handle it. I thought Dimmu Borgir was extreme at that point,
Sure.
know?
Yeah.
But I powered through it, didn't like it at all, heard a couple more songs by them that sounded completely different, became confused, but because I had been listening to Mr. Bungle, I could kind of like appreciate that sort of inclination towards genre hopping, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Then I saw that video of them playing at the Virgin Megastore where Greg runs on people's heads.
Oh, okay.
And at that point, I became obsessed.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was the kid who would show his friends like 43% burnt or, even like older shit. Like I remember showing one of my friends Abe the Cop off the Under the Running Board CD while we were waiting for our parents in front of the fucking middle school. Just like, yo, don't you think this is cool? And he was like, no, this is awful.
Right.
So, it was a very lonely childhood that I had at that point on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then from there, it was a pretty short path to bands like Converge, Botch, Drowning Man, Coalesce, Cave In. And that was also a nice entry point to stuff like death metal.
Mm-hmm.
I started listening to bands like Cynic, Death, Morbid Angel, Cryptopsy, grindcore bands like Pig Destroyer and Discordant Axis. And of course, from there, 1,000 different other forms of like extreme metal and punk, power violence, sludge, etc.
Yeah.
At the same time, My Chemical Romance were huge. Because the Black Parade had recently come out, and especially in New Jersey, they were a fucking phenomenon, right?
Sure, yeah.
So, even though by then I was already listening to Dillinger, I thought they were poser music. I still like gritted my teeth and powered my way through some of their songs, and I realized, oh shit, I actually like this a lot. So, again, I guess like the iTunes music store, that was my path to all things real, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was reading about MyChem on iTunes, and Thursday was mentioned in their bio. So I listened to a couple Thursday songs, thought they sucked, waited about 9 months to give them another chance. And I think the only reason why I gave them another chance is because someone that I had a crush on, she was really into Census Fail. So I checked out Census Fail. I saw that they were listed as post-hardcore, and I made that connection with Thursday. Oh, wasn't that band Thursday a post-hardcore band? So I went to the library. I think A City by the Light Divided was there. I took it out, listened to it, and I was absolutely blown away. And from there, I got into bands like Fugazi, Quicksand, DC hardcore and like emo core, whatever, like Rites of Spring, as well as other post-hardcore bands like they're post-hardcore bands from that era, like Glassjaw, At the Drive-In. I guess they're a bit earlier, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And because this was also the era of anything and everything that had even a couple screams being labeled screamo, I became familiar with the term. Thursday, of course, came from the New Brunswick DIY scene. Mm-hmm. So they actually played with and hosted a ton of real screamo bands.
Right.
And Jeff Rickley would constantly name drop those bands in interviews. So I learned about Stacia, Page 99, Orchid, City of Caterpillar, all of the bands that even now are more or less the go-to entry bands for that sort of sound,
Sure, yeah.
And for me, that was it. That was like the real light bulb moment, because I feel like that sort of music combined the extremity that I saw in groups like Dillinger or Cryptopsy or whatever, with the emotional fragility and vulnerability and sensitivity that I found really inspiring in bands like Thursday, and even softer bands like, Sunny Day Real Estate, Mineral, Jimmy Eat World, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really the story of me getting into all sorts of extreme music. And then from there, my taste just exploded in every direction.
Right.
So,
Well, you know how there's restaurants that have like that farm to table kind of thing? I feel like you just did that with your entire music journey. You literally gave like seed to where we're at today. But I do appreciate it, and you do it in a very thorough and tangible way. Nothing felt like, oh, I don't understand how we got to this branch. But
Well, that's good. I
yeah.
feel like I could be accused of a lot of things, but not being thorough is not one of those things.
Yeah.
You know, like
I was gonna ask you if, because there's a theme I'm hearing where you would hear something and hate it up front and then power through it, as you said, to kind of like get it. And sometimes that happens. Like some people either get latched on immediately, or they're like, I don't understand this new release by this band, and I have to re-listen to it because I feel like I need to figure it out. But at least for those first two bands that you were mentioning, I was thinking, were you giving that more effort to understand it because they were from your hometown versus if they were a band from California or Texas or Florida?
Huh. That's interesting. You know, I never thought about it. Consciously, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
But certainly on a subconscious level, it's possible that I wanted to understand those things because I had some like nascent sense of Jersey pride.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, because like at least from where I grew up, like I grew up in the dead center of Canada in Winnipeg, and like our one band that I think like pushed beyond the local boundaries, large like there was Figure 4, but like Comeback Kid was the big band in the punk hardcore world, and so like it was almost weird to meet someone that there were people that maybe like didn't like some of the new stuff, but like they would look a little foolish not to deny like the earlier material that kind of like pushed them out into that greater stratosphere, you know?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, you know, I think that makes sense. I definitely think at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, you know how it is. It was the same way in Jersey, even though you wouldn't necessarily think so because we're by New York City, we're by Philadelphia. There are 9 million people who live in an extremely small state. It's the most densely populated state in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, especially where I grew up, which was an extremely suburban, extremely conservative, extremely culturally bereft town, nobody was interested, or very few people were interested in anything that was remotely alternative. And the people who were interested in those things were interested in the most mainstream, sanitized version of those things.
Yeah.
So, you know, they as someone who always felt inclined to dig deeply, as someone who always was attracted to things that were stranger or mysterious or, you know, things that had artistic or intellectual heft, which I certainly felt in bands like Dillinger or Thursday. I don't know. I think on a subconscious level, the idea that bands like that were from where I was from, that was really attractive, even if at that point I wasn't ready to admit to myself how alone I actually was, you know?
Right. Yeah. And there's the other side of it where it's like if there's a girl that you like and you're trying to really like a band to be liked by them, that also plays a part as well.
Well, you know, the thing is I definitely overstepped because, you know, I went way beyond Census Fail. If I had stuck with Census Fail, maybe it would have been a different story.
Sure.
But once I started listening to like Fugazi, I had completely forgotten about that whole romantic infatuation. You know, I was like, oh man, this is it. This is life.
Yeah. Mark is married to the noise, not the chase for girls. So
yes.
I wanted to go back to what you're saying as far as like just hearing the term screamo and kind of like seeing that with like other bands in that proper context, because I think I was on a bit of a different trajectory because like I kind of went through, you know, listening to like, you know, still listening to like the classic metal and new metal stuff, but then kind of like staying more on that side, like the Dillinger, Escape Plan, and bands like even like Every Time I Die were like I was aware of them, but they were almost like a little too out of the like they it was like I think the craziest band that I could like watch from afar was like the Chariot, because it was just like their live videos were just like crazy and over the top, and it was like an undeniable force. And thankfully I got to see that band live before they hung it up officially. But when I was listening to, you know, anything from My Chemical Romance to Yellow Card to Simple Plan or whatever it was like emo, or sorry, not emo, but like screamo and emo as well. But since we're talking more about screamo, that was almost like used in a way to describe music for people that didn't understand any type of music, you know? So like when, like the more that I got into music, and then when new friends and like this section of like DIY music was kind of introduced to me, and it's like, oh, this is actually the terminology for it. And it was kind of like reintroduced to me in like a correct term. I don't know if you feel the same way, or
you know what?
If you have any thoughts on that.
It's funny. I had a totally different experience as a kid because I got into extreme music through thrash, I think.
Okay.
Like the idea with thrash, at least as I understood it at the time, was that it was in many ways a rejection of what was happening in like the hair metal scene, right? So the emphasis was all about, like realness, authenticity, quote unquote. And it positioned itself as an explicitly underground form of music. This marriage of the virtuosity of metal with the attitude and speed and aggression of hardcore punk.
Yeah.
So what that taught 10-year-old me was, oh, in order to understand anything musically, you always have to dig, right? And find what's real.
Right.
So I discovered is such a pretentious word. Like I found, these real screamo bands, quote unquote, before I truly understood how broadly that term had been like misapplied.
Right.
Like, I think I heard like a friend refer to Avenged Sevenfold as screamo once, but that was so absurd because they were a metal band. I didn't even realize that screamo was like an actual term. I thought he was just making shit up, right?
Right, exactly.
So by the time I realized that screamo was a genre and that it was a genre that could be like inappropriately assigned to bands that weren't actually screamo, I was already neck deep in the real thing. Yeah.
Sure.
And same with it was the same with emo. Like like I said, I got into My Chemical Romance, but by and large, I had totally avoided that phase of like more mainstream leaning pop punk. Like I wasn't into Fall Out Boy, I wasn't into Simple Plan, I wasn't into Blink 182, I wasn't into Sum 41, any of those groups. It was pretty much My Chem and then like Minor Threat for me.
Right.
So I was like a 40-year-old at the age of 16 just grumbling about people, who didn't know anything about anything,
right,
misusing these terms, constantly frustrated that like real music, quote unquote, wasn't being appreciated, which like is obviously fucking absurd. It's very like old man yells at clouds, right?
Right.
But yeah, so I had a totally different experience.
Well, and it was in a way where like, terminology from our world that like if someone's calling someone like a poser or like that is stuff that we just use. But like it's like my mom or like, people like adults in my school would be like, why are you listening to that screamo music? And so it was so wildly used by like people even outside of the culture. So that like I can't really pinpoint anything else, at least in my journey, where I saw people using like a way to describe a not even a genre of music, but just like an aspect of music and trying to bundle it up in an incorrect way, unknowingly, but just in a way for them to understand it, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, I mean that absolutely makes sense. I agree. And yeah, I can't think of anything like that either.
Yeah.
Certainly in the world of metal, it feels like the terminology is almost always pretty precisely used.
Yeah.
Occasionally you'll have someone calling something death metal that isn't death metal, but it's rare and no one really cares.
Yeah. But like nothing to like to demean like there's not really any terminology that'd be used to like try to devalue a certain type of death metal. It would just be incorrectly identifying the type potentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's interesting because you're right. It's not just a matter of misattribution. It's like simultaneous misattribution and denigration. Yeah. I don't know, but I mean that goes back even to the early days of emo, right? When Rites of Spring were called an emo core band, they hated it, you know. So
Sure.
it's just that sort of yeah. That's why we make the music that we do.
Yeah, I guess so. So, so at this time, you're neck, like you said, neck deep in the real deal screamo shit.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm even at this point, I was even listening to groups like A Day in Black and White and, Love Lost but Not Forgotten. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think of other more like obscure fucking bands, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, they're not obscure to people up north, right? But like Shotmaker, Maximilian Colby, groups like that, going back to like the early days of screamo as well. Honeywell and uh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Yeah. So I was really, really frustrated
Right.
when people didn't use the word screamo properly.
Right.
And I wanted more than anything to find people with whom I could start a band like that.
Right.
Well, I thought I had it once. I joined what I thought was going to be like a metalcore, hardcore band, and Axe to Fall by Converge had just come out like a week prior.
Oh,
and I learned the drums, or like an approximation of the drums for the title track. So I showed everyone that song thinking, oh, it's a minute and a half. It's straightforward. It rips. They're going to dig it. And they played me a Devil Wears Prada song. And they were like, this is how we want to sound.
You're like, we are on the same tree, but on very opposite branches, my friend.
Yeah. Oh, I was so much of an elitist. I was like, we're not even in the same forest.
That is I love that analogy. I'm gonna start using that within that.
Yeah.
But I think what I was trying to kind of like connect here is that like you already feel like an outsider when you're discovering this music, and the majority of people that you're going to school with, or even your family members, if they don't have a similar upbringing, you feel very much on an island. I felt very much on an island when I was, listening to anything from Avenged to A Day to Remember to fucking Killswitch Engage. But I felt like you were on the island, off of the island, where it's like, this is the real deal screamo shit, and like you could probably see your counterparts or people that you were hoping to come over. And again, I might be speaking a little out of turn, but I'm just kind of trying to paint the picture as far as like the more that you dig, the more niche things actually get. And when you're like 16, 17, even earlier ages of that, and you don't have people that you can like have that sense of community with, that can either make or break you, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm just thankful that I always had a really broad taste in music.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I couldn't connect with people on that level, I was getting into bands, like I said, like through Thursday and through getting into bands like Sunny Day Real Estate and other early emo groups. I found like shoegaze and indie, and I was starting to get into jazz. So I was still able to connect with my friends who were into like weirder music on that level.
Sure.
But yeah, I always did feel a little bit isolated in the sense that it always seemed like the people around me who I felt like should have been going deeper with me, even if they didn't ultimately like what they heard, it seemed like they were dismissive about things that existed in the same world they occupied.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was really more it. You can't expect, even as like a relatively solipsistic teenager, you can't expect people to like all the same things that you like, if you're at least a little bit self-aware.
Yeah.
And recognize that this shit you're listening to most people sounds like noise. But you'd think, oh, well, this person listens to X, Y, and Z. This person understands at least a little bit like the history of where these things are coming from. So they'll give this the time of day. But I never found that to be the case. And of course, I'm sure I was equally dismissive of a variety of things that my friends wanted to show me,
Sure.
Yeah.
The challenge of having other people either check out your shit or shit that you're just excited about, like that goes back to, the first day of this universe, it just seems to be so embedded with people, Yeah, and I try my best to check out as much stuff as I can, not only because I have a platform where I'm trying to, put things on that, are exciting me, but I feel like it is a valuable um, practice. And I think that some people have applied that a little bit more, kind of, especially when the pandemic was first kicking off, and they're like, oh shit, I really have no excuses now to check out new music. But yeah, there is I can understand the sentiment when you're so excited about stuff and people within your circle are like, I've dug this layer deep and I'm good up here. And you're
Yep.
like, there's such good stuff down here that I know that you would like. And you're like, nah. So I get that.
Yeah. Yeah. But c'est la vie.
Say Levy, that's right. So we've talked a lot about your origin, just on this whole music pack. Talk to me about how your band started and how like playing music kind of came into play. Was that immediate? Did you have like background in your family doing that, or did you discover the music and then become obsessed and change your life forever?
Well, for me personally, I started drumming almost as soon as I started listening to music.
Okay.
Again, back to when I was 10 years old, I heard The Who on the radio. It was, I think, Overture off of their Tommy record, and I was immediately transfixed. And I was particularly transfixed with Keith Moon's drumming. So I asked my parents if I could play the drums. Neither of them are musicians. Well, my mom played a little bit of organ when she was a kid, being an Italian in a Roman Catholic family, but she didn't stick with it. My dad has no artistic capabilities or inclinations whatsoever.
Yeah.
That's not even insulting. That's just the truth.
Yeah, that's just facts.
He's a black hole of anti-artistry,
Maybe
Yeah.
spit up my water here, Mark.
Yeah.
Because I have a very similar father figure in my life. So.
Yep. It's how it is sometimes. Sometimes I find myself like caught up in envy over people who grew up in really are like creatively fertile households, or communities. It must have been lovely, but that was not my experience. But to my parents' eternal credit, they didn't dismiss my interest. They said, okay, we'll get you a snare drum, probably thinking that I was going to stick with it for a couple weeks and then move on like most 10-year-olds do, but
Sure.
I didn't. I really wanted to dig into it, even though I had no idea what was happening. I knew so little about the drums. I thought you only needed one drum to make all of the sounds, cymbals included.
I mean, in some music genres, that's true, but not for what we do.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Like I would listen to My Generation and I'd say, how is Keith Moon making all those sounds with just one drum?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my parents bought me a drum kit, like a groove percussion starter kit. And that was really it. I never took lessons or anything like that because, again, the drawbacks of having a family who aren't really into art, they didn't understand how difficult drumming actually is, or why it might be necessary for someone to take lessons, but they didn't mind me pounding away all the time. So
honestly, I would much rather parents who are totally cool with you banging at all hours, like just as much as you want, versus someone who's pushing lessons. Because like that environment of like you can only play from this time to this time, or like you can be in a band but not at our house, like that will chokehold you way more than just how fast you can pick it up in like in a teacher student kind of environment.
I think so. Maybe it's the sort of thing where if I had been introduced to the idea of lessons a couple years after starting, it would have been a good thing. But yeah, if they had forced it upon me immediately, I probably would have stopped. And I mean, I have to thank my neighbors as well. They tolerated the noise too. Yeah, I mean, I was so into it so immediately that around the time I got my drum kit, I fractured one of the growth plates in my arm, playing baseball. And
okay.
I kept drumming, even with a cast on. So, that was it.
That's real dedication. That's some real deal, like, nothing's going to stop me shit, so.
Yep. And, as far as playing in bands is concerned, it took a couple years. When I was in seventh grade, I had a couple friends who wanted to form a pop punk band a la Blink-182, who at that point were only 2 years removed from their initial breakup, right?
Oh, okay.
This is 2007.
Right.
So, yeah, like the untitled record, it's still pretty recent, Um, yeah, we formed the band. We didn't do shit, but we had a band.
So you joined the pop punk band, probably biting your tongue at this point, or were you just eager to play anything at this?
Well, you know what it was? I didn't realize how. I think at the time I underestimated how much I would dislike playing that music. Although I did grow to appreciate Blink-182.
Okay.
So I did grow to appreciate them and like some of their music, especially the untitled record, which I think is actually a great album. But I think I also underestimated, I overestimated the ease with which you can convince people to play other forms of music. Like, oh yeah, we'll play some Blink-182 and then we're going to try to learn Dillinger songs. Like, no, that never happened. So by the time I was in high school and that band was reaching the end of its life, I was becoming extremely frustrated and I was feeling really stifled, even though we weren't even doing enough for me to feel stifled,
Right.
I was like a pretentious, tortured artist, Like, have you ever seen the movie Burning, the South Korean movie?
I don't think so, no.
Well, it's a masterpiece, right?
Okay.
But one of the, running jokes in the movie, even though it's not a comedy, right? But one of the running jokes is the main character considers himself a writer and introduces himself as such, even though you never see him write a single fucking word the entire movie.
Right.
So that was me. I was like a tortured musician who never actually created music, at 14.
Right.
Ridiculous, but yeah. But yeah, then, I formed another band. It really wasn't until college, though, where I started playing music seriously with other people.
Right.
I went to Ramapo College of New Jersey, a small public college in North Jersey. And when I got there, it just so happens there was an extremely vibrant music scene that lacked a drummer. There were no drummers. There were tons of guitarists and bassists and keyboard players and saxophonists and amazing vocalists, like people who could sing, like really sing beautifully. And they were playing jazz and folk and indie and anything else you could think of that wasn't heavy. But no one drummed. So I just played for everybody.
Which usually is what happens. Either it will be one scene that has one drummer that's in 5 or 7 bands, or maybe you're lucky and you have 2. Like, it's just sometimes the name of the game. Like, I've actually witnessed scenes kind of go through a time of of drought when a band moves from one city to the other, and it's unfortunate, but it is the reality.
Yeah, 100%. It's exactly what happens. And fortunately, it wasn't a struggle because I love folk music, I love indie, I love jazz. So I really enjoyed playing all of that music. And at that time my tastes were shifting, because I discovered extreme music at such an early age. All of these less extreme forms of music were new to me. And I was getting really into more avant-garde experimental stuff too. I was getting into ambient, modern classic or minimalist music. So at that point I'd kind of given up on the hope of ever playing in a screamo or a punk band,
Okay.
And I don't think at the time I was too sad about it, or at least I wouldn't allow myself to admit how sad I actually was, because I was like, well, I'm playing all these other styles that are just as fulfilling, at least from a pure musical standpoint,
Right.
And
sorry, were you going to school for something music related, or was
no.
it totally
nope, psychology? I have a master's in psychology.
Got you.
Yeah, I took a couple music classes my senior year because I had finished the major requirements when I was a junior.
Yeah.
But instead of graduating early, I just decided to continue taking classes. So I was able to take a couple music theory classes, which I found extremely beneficial. But nope. Psych major, to my everlasting chagrin. That's what I chose to study.
Yeah. But it is kind of a thing that I'm seeing now, and it's not even just within one specific genre, is that I think people now, like I just turned 30 this year myself, and like it was only in the last couple of years where it was like I had not like checked out of like, I just kind of thought it was like, oh, I kind of passed the prime time of what it means to play in a band that can go on tour and can go play festivals and different things. But I'm seeing now that like, and I don't know if this is like maybe a COVID thing or like of just kind of the timing of how things are at now, but I kind of feel like a lot of bands can have a pop, but it's into their late 20s or early 30s. And it kind of like extends the window a little bit. And maybe like some people are also like, it's obviously easier to do all this shit when, you know, if you're a young 22-year-old and you have like very little responsibilities and bills to pay, but it's like, it's not like impossible or unheard of to do that in our kind of age bracket now.
I completely agree. And I think, you know, maybe it is a COVID thing, like you're saying. Maybe that was just the moment people needed to really, in a serious way, reassess their value system, what they actually wanted and what they actually felt was possible.
Right.
Maybe, you know, with the internet too, the way nothing ever dies anymore, right? The way in which technological development and like cultural overstimulation has, I think, in some ways stunted our like overall emotional development. I think, you know, I don't know. I think in some ways, like there's an episode of The Sopranos where Dr. Melfi at one point says that, like, I'm really like paraphrasing, but she makes a comment to Tony that like 25 now is the equivalent of like what 21 was when you were a kid. And that episode came out, you know, 16 years ago.
Right.
And there's been exponential technological development since then. So by that logic, maybe 30 is what 21 used to be. You know, but I don't think it's even as simple as that. Maybe we're just reassessing what it means to age and what's possible or what's not possible, you know, as you age. And you know, I think we're maybe divorcing certain assumptions that we make about aging from like the act of aging itself.
Yeah.
Like that, you know, when you get older, it necessarily means that you settle down and you take on certain responsibilities, because all of that stuff is arbitrary, right?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
It has been very eye-opening, like when I look at a festival lineup now and it's like, oh, it's not just like, here's all the 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are like starting all these bands. Like there are some of that, and I think that there's definitely a time and place for that, because there is something, at least in my bones, when I see a band killing it and it's like, y'all just like graduated high school like last year. That's so sick.
Yep.
But at the same time, you can see a bunch of people who are, you know, have careers, who have jobs, who are like, have kids, but they're still making the core thing happen and doing the band shit. And I think that's cool too. So, so you're kind of, you do the college thing, you start a couple other bands. When does Massa come into the picture?
Well, my last year of college, I joined another band called Our Wits, which ended up sort of becoming a screamo band. Like not really, but sort of.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I was over the moon about. Because I was like, finally, it's happening. You know. I remember the day we started making music, I gathered all of my friends and like my ex and everything, and I was like, okay, like I know I've been harping on about Modest Mouse and John Coltrane and, you know, Stars of the Lid and all of these groups, but here's City of Caterpillar.
Yeah.
Like here's the shit that I actually love that I never talked about. So, you know, it was pretty sick. And then like probably about 4 or 5 months after we got up and going, we played a show off campus, which I'd never done before, at this VFW hall. And the band that would become Massa NERA was also playing that show.
Oh, okay. So this is the band before the band. Okay.
Yep, exactly. Chris and Alan were in it, as well as all of the other original members of Massa NERA besides me.
Sure.
In fact, Chris booked the show. It was the only show he ever booked, rather fortuitously, you know? So we played first, and you know, we did it. I think we did a good job. I always thought we were a great live band, so I was pretty confident, maybe overconfident. I don't know. And then this band played. I don't even want to say their name, just because I know Chris and Alan feel a certain type of way about that.
There
history.
are many bands that have certain rules if they were to do the pod to not mention the old name. So yeah, I respect it. Don't you worry.
Yeah, but if anyone wants to find the music, like it's still online, it's easy to find, you know. So they played. I really dug it. The old vocalist of Massa Nera, who was also their vocalist, he was drumming and screaming because they had lost their drummer.
Okay.
So they had this like ramshackle raw sound that reminded me of real screamo bands. I went up to Chris afterwards and I was like, yo, that was really fucking sick. Like I was screamo as hell. I didn't even realize, but at the time, none of them were even really listening to much screamo. You know, they were new to the sound. They got into it through like Touche Amore, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And Chris was like, yeah, you know, thanks. Your band was cool. Do you listen to jazz music? And I was like, yeah, I do. He was like, yeah, I love jazz. You know, I listen to Thelonious Monk. What about Toe? You know, the Japanese like math rock band. And I was like, yeah, I love Toe. And I was just thinking to myself, who the fuck is this kid talking to me about jazz and Toe at this punk rock show, right?
Right.
So a few months later, I saw on Facebook that they needed a new drummer. And I thought to myself, ooh, that's the band with that kid who likes jazz music. Maybe that could be interesting. You know, that could become something really interesting. Because I don't want to, no matter what I do, I never approach it from the perspective of like honoring genre or being pure or being precious about something. I want to experiment and fuck with things and combine things and take things apart and make something as interesting as possible, you know? And certainly that's the case when it comes to heavy music. So, you know, I hit them up. A week went by, I hit them up again, auditioned, joined the band on the strength of their older stuff. And it was at that point that that they told me like, hey, we're abandoning all that stuff. We're changing our name. We want to become a new band. And thus Massa Nera was born.
Okay. So you are and are not the original drummer in some, you know, depending on how you look at it.
I'm an original member of Massa Nera, if you really consider Massa Nera like as like a new band distinct from this older thing.
Right.
But if you consider both bands as like part of the same continuum, then I'm not.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit there. But yeah, that's so funny that you're at like the serendipity of you being at a show and two people knowing this very obscure Japanese band, not even like a jazz band, not even within the heavy music spaces. If that wasn't the sign to maybe, you know, pay more attention, I don't know what would have been.
Oh,
so.
100%. Even more serendipitous was the fact that, as it turned out, Chris lived 5 minutes away from me. So, you know, literally the town that I live in, he lived in the next town over. Across the street from his house was my town. Like you know, literally, yeah. Like you make it halfway across the street, you're in Clark. You take a few steps back, you're in Linden. So
that's so wild.
That's how New Jersey is. All the towns bleed into each other. It's crazy. Right. That's, you know, what happens when you make the entire state one gigantic suburb. But yeah, so you know, and then from there, I mean, it's all pretty self-explanatory. We just kept doing stuff, and now I'm talking to you.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Going back to the intro, I think like the first time I saw you guys was New Friends 19, right? 2019, yeah. I wasn't sure if the first New Friends was before or after COVID, but it was before. And you guys stuck out to me as, again, I was a little bit of a fish out of water. Well, I was a fish out of water in a new pond. So there was like a bunch of new types of DIY music that I was experiencing for the first time. And I've talked to Vanessa and like other members of the team about this, but like it honestly was one of the most like in a super good way a challenging experience for me, because like I was just so reliant on the 4/4 punk hardcore fast part into two step into breakdown. I could do that formula, like I could literally close my eyes and move my camera. But New Friends, at least 2019, my first time being exposed to all that, I was like, oh, majority of these bands play in time signatures that are not 4/4. And there's like I had to lean on my like shooting, like my spidey senses of like shooting, as far as like really being in tune with what was happening there versus what I was expecting to happen. But you guys specifically had at least that lineup. You guys were one of the only bands that like had those like connection points to like some, and especially on some of the newer stuff that you guys put out on this latest release, there was like clear things. I was like, oh, this is like the punk beat into like this kind of like more two-step kind of stuff. So to me, it felt like I understood your guys' music outside of the majority of the stuff. It's not that like I didn't appreciate all the bands that were playing, but I like connected to you guys the most. And then when you guys played again for 2022, which, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys weren't on the bill originally. You were filling a band, but did you have to break into a jam space?
No, not even a jam. Oh man. Oh fuck. So this is so funny. Yeah.
I remember us talking about this after the fest.
Yep. Yeah. We so last year, I guess for anyone who doesn't know and who cares for whatever inexplicable reason, I filled in for Respire, who actually their episode with you, I think it was when Denouement came out. So way back in the day.
Yeah.
It was the first podcast episode of yours that I listened to.
Yeah, because I think Rohan was, so here's a little podcast lore for you. I did an episode with Vanessa when we were only doing stuff in person pre-COVID. And we had like an issue with like the audio, so it never came out. But I think she was just in town in Calgary and we set something up. But I think I've bugged her about coming back on the show. But yeah, Rohan's episode was kind of one of the first ones where kind of like diving into that side of the DIY music stuff. So I appreciate you checking that one out.
Of course, yeah. No, that record was really important to me on a personal level. So, which they tease me about, but lovingly tease me. I think I sent them a whole email and everything because I was off social media at the time.
Sure.
Because I was unbelievably depressed, and I remember listening to that album crying in a Barnes and Noble, like literally crying. I'm not even a big crier, despite playing screamo music. Just crying, and I had Egan's email and I wrote like 10 fucking paragraphs. What a shocker, given how much I'm talking on this episode. So yeah, we were not originally part of New Friends Fest 2022. We played the first two iterations of the fest in 2018 and 2019. And in fact, New Friends explicitly told us that because we played the first two fests, we weren't going to play the third one. Even when it was initially announced in 2020, back when it seemed like maybe the pandemic would only last a couple months, and then everything will be fine, we weren't on that bill. And we were totally fine with that, of course. We were like, yeah, it makes sense. We'll play the fourth one maybe,
Yeah.
Fast forward to late July 2022. I'm up in Toronto, getting ready to rehearse with Respire for their Euro tour.
Yeah, because that was like right after.
Yes. Oh, it was right after. Indeed. I have stories, but I pull up with my partner, right? My spouse, and we get out of the car, and instead of saying hi or what's up, Egan and Rohan are like, hey, does Massa Nera want to play New Friends? And I was like, well, yeah, sure, but like there's no way it's gonna happen. It's just too short notice. Alan doesn't even have his passport in yet. But I'll ask them. Fuck it, right? So I texted them, and they were all like, "Yeah, you know what? We can make it work." And I was like, "Are you sure?" And Alan was like, "Well, yeah, but I don't know if I'm gonna get my passport in time." But
Well, how many days is this before the fest?
5.
5.
Yeah,
Damn,
or no,
okay.
7. It's 7 days before the fest. It's
Okay,
literally
5 business days. at the
yes,
very
5
least.
business days. It's Friday night, the week before New Friends. So I didn't text them until Saturday. So time is really not on our side, right?
Right.
Fortunately, if you are a U.S. citizen or a U.S. resident, you don't need a passport to get into Canada. You just
Must be
need,
nice.
yeah, you just need it. It's not fair. It really is unfair.
Yeah.
And
That's a whole tangent I
obviously
will not pester you about.
yeah. No. I mean, pester away because it's fucking absurd. The U.S. border laws are so draconian and only getting more draconian. And we're the ones who ultimately lose out because there are so many incredible Canadian bands that should be able to play here.
Thank
Not
you.
just Canadian, but from everywhere.
Thank you for saying it. Thank you. Because I come on the show, and anytime it comes up, I'm just like, it is more criminal that there are so many barriers for any Canadian band to even just play one show that they might even get paid $100, if that.
Yep.
That is more criminal than Canadian to American Taco Bell. I'll just put that out.
You should suggest, or maybe I'll do it right now. There was this band, they were around in like 2015 to 2017, Como Vere. You've never heard of them. That's okay. They died before they really had the chance to blossom into like a beautiful fucking bird or whatever. Now that birds blossom. But anyway, they did a U.S. tour. Mm-hmm. They managed to get into the country without visas. It was them and the Ultimate Screamo Band. What they did was they put a cross on the front windshield of the van and presented a contract, quote unquote, stating that they were a Christian band going to record an album in Nashville. And that apparently worked. They even had the phone number listed for like the recording engineer. Right. Border Patrol called that dude.
Dude, I have friends on friends on friends who I could stop this podcast and just do a Canadians playing the States illegally podcast and have to do it like everyone's anonymous. That's not a terrible idea.
Honestly, you should absolutely do that. I would listen to that episode like 10 times.
Dude, I've heard and I will be not naming names, but there would be people would have fake band accounts, and they only play for charity events, and that band would give the login for that Facebook to other bands and be like, just say you're this band, and we'll change the photos and all this shit. But
that's fucking incredible. Yo,
it's fun.
Well, I was just gonna say, it's funny, but it's tragic, right?
Yes, it's funny to talk about here on a podcast for a few moments, but when you really think about it, there are so many bands, and I know because I literally just did a podcast with someone out in Europe, and we were just talking about, it's one thing for them to come over across a huge body of water and have to do all the passport stuff, but the fact that we are so close. I'm actually I'm not even too far away from you now because I know Scoped is in Western Canada, but I'm living with my folks in Eastern Canada, in Toronto, not too far away from you.
You're not. It's an 8-hour drive. Us to Montreal is 6 hours. Us to the Quebec border is only 5.
Yeah. So
it's really not.
There
far
would be
at all.
So many bands that would indefinitely the lives of those musicians could change indefinitely, even if there was a lift for 1 year of no work visas are needed for bands to go and play. I know that no one from the Canadian border or any government people are listening to this podcast at this moment, but if there's a string of a chance that there's a cause and effect, I know in every bone in my body that even if that was lifted for 1 year as an experimental thing, you would see such a crazy shift in like
Yeah.
Canadian bands as well as American bands, because it's like, oh, you come down and play, you have a scene, okay, cool, we're gonna come up and play next month or next year or whatever it is. Like, sorry, you're gonna get me going on it, but
no, it would only be beneficial. Well, you would lose your mind if you were in the car with us when we crossed the border into Canada, because it is such a joke. The last time we got to the border, they were like, passports, where are you from? And we were like, Linden. It took us a minute to even say New Jersey. We were just like, Linden. They're like, why are you here? Playing shows? When you leaving? Sunday? Have a nice weekend. That was it. Took 20 seconds.
I want to throw this computer against the wall. Like,
yeah. But anyway, as an American citizen or resident, you only need 2 forms of identification. So like a license or state ID and a birth certificate. That's it.
Yeah.
All of us have driver's license. So we were like, oh, well, Alan, do you have your birth certificate? And he was like, well, I'm pretty sure I have it in my safe, but I'm not sure. And I don't have the key anymore. So in order to figure out if he had it, he got a hammer, a crowbar, and a pickaxe. And he spent 2 hours breaking into it. And he
so
had
dedicated.
It. Yep, and he had it. So literally, he found that out. He found out if he had it Thursday night. So the day before we played.
Oh
so I texted new friends at like 11:30 p.m. that Thursday. Like, we could do it. We could play.
Oh,
yeah.
That's stressful. But a great story nonetheless.
Yeah, it was great. Someone after our set was like, that was a weird story to make up. And I was like, that wasn't made up. That was real. Why would I interrupt our set? Well, not for nothing, but we were fucking ripping that night. Why am I going to pause our set to tell a fake story about our guitars breaking into his own safe? That's fucking weird. It's questionable whether I should have done it knowing that the story was real. But to make something up, whatever.
Bands are not going on and kicking ass and then being like, yo, 2 truths and a lie. And then
exactly.
Yeah.
This isn't the Mark Boulanger comedy review, like.
God. Yes, but I forget how we got on that tangent, but
well, you were mentioning very, very sweetly and generously, like when you filmed New Friends 2019, how you were kind of like a fish in a new pond, right?
Right.
And that you felt like in our music, we had some of those more punk hardcore elements that you could sort of latch on to and connect to.
Yes. So yeah. Thank you for bringing me back. We got, as soon as we mentioned crossing the border and how that's hard for bands, I felt like Tasmanian Devil and I started spinning out of control. So, and what's funny is when you guys played 2022, unbeknownst to some of the circumstances, maybe with a week's notice, I remember I was talking to you and you were saying, oh yeah, like we're playing everything that's off what is now the latest release from you guys tonight, but we haven't really played it at other shows. But I was like, no, like I remember certain songs that you guys played all the way back in 2019, and then you like pause and you're like, oh yeah, we did, like there were certain tracks that we played. Mm-hmm. So
2 of the songs we played at 2019, songs 2 and 3 on the record, Hypocrita and Lost Faces, we were debuting pre-COVID. But the rest of the songs we played that night, we'd been playing since we started up shows again in like October 2021. Mm-hmm. But we hadn't played like, at any of the previous New Friends fests.
Right.
Right. But yeah, that's how long the fucking album was in the works. Longer even, just a real fucking odyssey.
Right.
But worth it. Totally worth it. Like an odyssey, but not troublesome or difficult to endure at all. It was a real pleasure because it was so exciting creatively.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I was
just gonna say, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, please. I'm really happy that you mentioned like the punk or like hardcore elements, that we have, because I feel like not that many people are talking about our music. Like, who are we, right? No one knows who we are. But I feel like usually the non-screamo elements that get signaled out are like the dancey parts, the Latin parts, the jazziness of it, or like the alleged jazziness of it, right? Because we're not improvising, we're not, playing 2-5-1 chord progressions, but there's a little bit of jazziness. But very rarely is it ever mentioned like, oh yeah, like you're also a punk band, and there are like these elements. So I'm really happy that you were able to latch on to that.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, there's certain parts like I think I can't remember the song specifically, but as soon as it was like guitar feedback and just like I was like, oh shit, we've strayed from a different, we're taking a bit of a detour from like here's like this and like jazzy like kind of dance part, which like again the musicianship to be able to combine both of those things under one roof is like something to be said. I think that's a great thing that you guys have been able to do. But with the record, coming out at the later part of last year, like obviously like some people get in a bit of like they're only thinking of like what has come out this year versus like, oh, like the things in October and November and December are still really, really fresh. So talk to me about like, yeah, like you guys put that out in December, how many times you've been able to play it like in full with people listening or knowing the tracks and knowing the lyrics. Talk to me about that.
Sure. Well, 1 second. Let me just I could feel the headset falling ever so slightly
That's
because of
fine.
my mop of hair, So well, it's been extremely gratifying. I mean, I will say, even before the record came out, playing those songs live was super rewarding. Um, uh, Originally, as I kind of alluded to earlier when I was talking about like the history of the band, or at least the history of me joining what would become the band.
Sure.
We initially had a standalone vocalist, right? And he's on everything that we did up until the split with Frail Body, Diana Krall's and Infant Island.
Okay.
All of our early stuff, the first two EPs, Los Pensamientos, the four-way split that we did with This Is Me Not Thinking of You, Your Sprite and Eiffel, all of that is like the original configuration of Massa Nera. So, when he left the band and Alan, Chris, and I started doing vocals, we immediately noticed a difference in terms of like the energy of the live performance and how connected we felt with the music. But we were still screaming words that by and large we didn't write. Playing songs that maybe we weren't 100% proud of.
Sure.
So when we finally got these songs to a place where we could play them live, and at that point, obviously AJ had joined the band. She was doing vocals too, so we really felt like we were functioning as a complete unit. Once we were able to play these songs live, and only play them live, like only songs from this record, like the difference I think became like it was like night and day. And it felt like the response from audiences was immediately like very receptive, even though they were hearing songs that they never heard. Obviously I'm specifically referring to people who were at least like familiar with us. For people who had never heard us, which is most people, it didn't make a fucking difference, but they were still into it too, or at least they were very polite. So yeah. So with that being said, now that the record's out in the world, it's been that much more gratifying, especially since we've been playing these songs for the better part of a year and a half now. So we feel like a well-oiled machine. I mean, since the album came out on December 2nd, we had 6 release shows in December. We did a 10-day tour in February. We were in Quebec last month. We were just in Ontario like 2 weeks ago.
I saw you guys played the Kill Room.
We did. Oh, what a fucking cool spot.
Dude, bucket, like my band played there at the end of 2021, and like this is a bucket list moment.
Yes.
To play a skate park, like we played it, I think one of the last shows before they covered the exposed beams on the roof.
Okay.
So we had people fucking like jungle gymming that shit. It was fucked up. But
Damn.
yeah, shout out to the Kill Room. That spot is really, really dope.
Really, really cool. No, it was so much fun playing there. The energy was awesome. The people were super enthusiastic. Or just great show. Great show all around. Yeah, we played in Ontario. We've played a couple local shows. We're going on an 8-day tour next month with Isla, including, ZBR Fest. We've got like a surprising number of shows booked for June. No tours or weekenders, just a bunch of standalone shows.
Oh.
And then we've got many, many more shows beyond that, which I'm not going to talk about with any degree of specificity. But yeah, so, maybe for a band that's comprised of like real road warriors, or a band that's able to commit themselves full time to the band, that's not a lot. But for us, given that, all of us, or at least some of us, work full time, right? Given that at this point, at least Massa Nera isn't a full time band, we've been playing quite a bit. Since last June when we did the previous ZBR Fest, we've probably played about 70 or 80 shows. So, it's a lot, and it's been amazing. It's been wonderful. Yeah, I can't say enough about the response that we've gotten. It's pretty surreal. Like I said, first, I never go into any show with the assumption that anyone's going to know who we are. And also, technology being what it is, at any given moment, you have access to more or less the entire history of recorded music. So for anyone to select our album out of that vast ocean of art, right, and give it time and come back to it multiple times and like familiarize themselves with it, it's there are really no words. It's just I'm really grateful for that. So yeah, it's been lovely.
Yeah, it is. Especially when you've been sitting on songs for a long, long time and you've been playing those songs. Like there's a band from out my way that I would say that they have, like, I've been telling members of this band, I was like, y'all should reach out to new friends, because I feel like you guys would be a little bit more on like the hardcore punk side, but like I think that they could still play like the side stage or something. But they're called False Body. They're very like Converge influenced, I would say. Like
Cool.
Lee, their guitar player, like plays a Rickenbacker, and he just fucking rips. So, but in the early days of Scoped, when I moved out to Alberta from Winnipeg, I was just covering them because they were like playing so many shows, and they hadn't recorded and put those songs out for a long time. And then COVID hit, and it extended it that much more. So it's been weird. We have this joke where it's been like both cool and weird to see, like, to be filming them and not knowing the song that they're playing, because I could I could like film that band set in their sleep, because I know every single change up, and they dabble with like some odd time signatures and some unique songwriting structure, but it's like now it's like, oh, that new song, like where I didn't know what I was doing when I was like doing the shit with the camera. So it is very gratifying to be like, okay, this is finally out, not on my Dropbox, and other people can listen to this shit now.
Exactly. The thing that made it a little easier for us, though, I will say, is that rather than finding ourselves in a situation where we recorded the album and everything was done and then we sat on it for 2 years, we spent a long time like working and reworking and revising and rearranging things. And then once the record was mostly recorded, we redid a lot of the vocals. And in doing that, we kept adding layers because, since all 4 of us do vocals, we'd say, why don't you back up a scream here? Or like, maybe we should do a call and response here or whatever. Right. And we should add a couple more lyrics. And also, we made a 32-page art booklet for the record. We made a separate art booklet for the cassette version. So we were working on the art aspect of it and working on music videos probably until like November.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it was like not 11th hour, but like 10th, maybe.
Exactly. So at
Yeah.
least in that regard, we were able to, like, it never felt like we were just spinning our wheels. We were constantly working towards achieving what we wanted to achieve with it.
Yeah.
And even now, it's not done per se. Like, we still are working on music videos. We have, like, another project that I'm not going to talk about because I want it to be a surprise for
Okay.
whoever cares. But yeah, it's nevertheless, it still was a massive relief to play those songs live.
Cool.
And have people know them. Yeah. It's great. And a couple people have said really, really, really kind things that I can't believe they sincerely mean, but apparently they do. I'm like convinced.
Like what's been the most heartwarming thing that someone has said about this release to you?
Okay.
Without I'm not trying to make you break down and cry or anything.
No. One person, they didn't say it to me, but they wrote it on like Bandcamp, on ZBR's Bandcamp, on their version. They said that it was like, it was something like album of the year, band of the decade. Like, no one can do it the way Massa Nera does. And I was just like, that's just objectively wrong. There's no way that's true. But,
band of the decade is like one of the highest. That's like some praise.
Yeah,
on
someone
praise.
else at the show at the Kill Room, we were playing with another band. I'm not gonna name which band it was, even though like the flyer is readily available, just because I don't want to expose them like that, right?
Right.
No pun intended, of course. But I was talking about how a couple friends of ours had mentioned them to us and how excited we were to play with them because we'd heard good things. And they were like, yo, that's crazy for you to say that because playing with you is like a bucket list thing for us.
Oh, I see.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
It's like, that's, crazy. Yeah, just things like that, which, it's really nice. It's very sweet because we're all part of the same scene. We're no different than the other bands playing or the audience watching or the people taking photos. So for anyone to say anything like that, it boggles the mind, at least for me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I will say, I don't want to risk sounding like too humble. Like it's amazing and it's surreal. But I do think that we're a good band, and I am confident in what we're doing. And we wouldn't be releasing music if we felt otherwise. So
right. Yeah, totally.
It's surreal and mind-blowing, but at the same time, it's very validating because I feel like we can continue doing what we're doing without compromise. And maybe, we can continue exploring and getting even stranger and weirder. And, we can continually try new things, and we know that people are going to be on board.
Yeah. Do you feel like I know like at least with the like this screamo to me is a genre that like really embraces that like going into the unknown and trying different things, especially on like a sonic level. But were there any points with this release where you're like, this is a risk? I don't know if this is gonna work. Nothing.
Actually, we oh man, it's funny you mentioned that. I should probably not say too much.
Okay.
Maybe I will anyway. I actually think that, and maybe it's different because you're coming more from the world of hardcore.
Yeah.
I guess, right? I feel like screamo is definitely adventurous in comparison to a lot of other subgenres.
Sure.
But I think especially nowadays, a lot of the bands that are really standing out tend to be groups that are really taking the form and making it their own. But I also feel like to find those bands, you do have to wade through a sea of copycats and nostalgia acts. And I think because screamo is a genre that really kind of blossomed during the era of the internet, early mid 2000s, it didn't emerge from like a tape trading scene or anything like that. People discovered it in their bedrooms. So it's a really personal thing, maybe even more personal in some ways than like extreme metal is,
Sure.
I think because of that, and because of like the nature of the lyrics and the politics and how vulnerable the people who find screamo tend to be, you get the situation where a lot of people, because of that, they want to, maybe they want to gatekeep. Maybe they're fine with the idea of screamo having a low ceiling, you know, kind of like being for people who are in the know. And I think a lot of people, they just want to replicate what they've heard, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there are a lot of amazing bands, past and present, who aren't necessarily doing anything new. And this isn't to say that Massa Nera is. I don't want to imply that per se, but you know, they're iterating on what came before, but it's exciting and it's real and it's passionate and it's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, that's not what really excites me.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say more or less everyone in Massa Nera feels the same way. So when we write, we really don't care about genre at all. We actually don't totally, like, I think we consider ourselves a screamo band, but we don't think that we're just a screamo band.
Yeah.
And if at one point we started making, like, our music continued to evolve and it was no longer screamo, we wouldn't care.
Yeah.
We just want to follow our interests, and we want to challenge ourselves as songwriters and musicians, and we want to continually digging deeper and deeper into our process in the pursuit of something that we can call like uniquely our own.
Mm-hmm.
So there was never a moment, I think, where we felt something was risky in the sense that we thought people wouldn't get it, or we would alienate people, or we were straying too far from like the path, so to speak. If there were definitely a couple moments where we were trying something that really tested our musicianship.
Sure. Yeah.
I
like that. Testing the musicianship versus like being too unique. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like where like maybe we were trying a different sound or whatever. And at the moment, at least when we were writing that passage, we couldn't play with the sensitivity that we needed to play in order to get it to sound good, you know?
Yeah.
You know, like playing a bossa nova part and making it sound like a punk musician playing bossa nova rather than a bossa musician, right? Or like the electronic passage on the record, you know? That's something that, again, it definitely felt like we were taking a risk, even though when Alan brought that song to the band, Shapeshift, right from the beginning, the idea was always to transition into an electronic passage.
Got you.
So there was never an idea that felt too out of bounds. The risk really came from trying to develop those ideas and having moments where we thought to ourselves, maybe we don't have the skill needed to pull it off.
Okay. So there might have been times where it was like, we want to do a part like this, but we are not in a place on our musicianship level to like either execute this properly or pay homage to this in its proper context.
Exactly. Or, you know, maybe as songwriters, we're not at a place where we can have all of these ideas flow into each other in a way that still feels cohesive and coherent.
Yeah, totally.
You know, where it feels like we're
like it's already one thing to staple, like for hardcore bands to like staple riffs together. It's another thing to staple parts of entirely different genres together.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, it could easily become something like I love them. I love Between the Buried and Me. But like we all know, as far as like their writing is concerned, they're not necessarily the best when it comes to transitions, right?
Sure.
They put a drum fill there, or they just kind of smash into the next part, and it's great because they're virtuosos, right? And their creativity is boundless. But for us, flow is the most important thing.
Sure.
We want, you know, if we're going from like a sludge metal part to, I don't know, a fucking like merengue style dance part, we want someone to listen to the song, get to the merengue part, and think to themselves, oh, of course, this is where the song is going.
Right.
Because it just feels
not
natural.
Like, how did we get here?
Exactly. No, that would be the worst thing possible. And I like to think we would never allow that to happen, but you know, yeah. So that's where it felt like we were taking risks because we were really challenging ourselves, you know, testing ourselves. But no, we almost never consider how people are going to react when we write songs. We're fucking selfish.
Yeah, no, there's an undeniable amount of intentionality with like, and I'm thinking about when I was like editing your guys' set and when I was listening to the record today, like there's like, even if I was to skip forward like 5 seconds, I could still know where I was in the song versus like, oh, you know? So I think you guys did a killer job with that.
Damn, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that because it's exactly what we were trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what, lyrically, I feel like we were taking a bit of a risk too, because the album has all of these phrases that recur and images that recur and build off of each other. It's meant to be like our goal was we want to write a record, like an album, not a collection of songs.
Right.
And we want there to be themes, we want there to be motifs. We wanted to construct almost like a lyrical spider web. That's what we would call it. So, you know, that was definitely a risk, thinking like, oh, is this actually going to work? And I don't know if it did, because, you know, especially in heavy music, I don't know if people always pay attention to the lyrics. So I don't know. No one's really even brought it up. Like, oh, you know, that phrase in this song, you bring it back in this other song, but the context is totally different. Like, does it mean something else? Even though like literally you're saying the same thing.
Right.
Or like, oh, the lyrics that start the record also end the record. Like, what's going on there? Blah, 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 blah. So maybe we didn't pull it off. I don't know. I felt happy at the end of the process, but
like I am someone that loves hearing the lore and the connection points between like anything creative. Like I played all of the Halo games like religiously, and then anytime I could like find an Easter egg, and it's like, okay, playing this difficulty, and if I go to this point, then I can hear this happen or I can see this. So I love all of those little details. Especially in music, I try to do the same thing with my bands, and I think I've gotten to a point now where it's like not everyone is going to pick up on every specific little detail. I don't know if you see my dog just
amazing.
Yeah, she's great. But
what's your dog's name?
Her name is Minnow.
Minnow. Oh.
Yeah. So just naming a fish after our dog, but or a dog after a fish. But like I think there are some things that at least you knew, like, oh, I connected these things, but like some people don't know, will never know the context is until you talk about it here on a podcast or like different things like that. But like I am more of a music, like I think some people are a little nerdy with like certain bands, so they'll sit down, they'll like read all the lyrics, and then, you know, find either they'll catch those Easter eggs that you guys were laying, or maybe miss them all altogether. But I don't think that defines whether a body of art or like a piece of work is good or not. I think it's more the sprinkles on top of the cake.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And also, you know, of course, you can't control the terms on which, or with, you know, on which like someone approaches your work.
Yeah.
Everyone's coming to art with their own baggage, their own preconceptions, their own desires, and you just have to sit back and accept that.
Right.
And it's been really interesting too, because like we did all of this stuff. So on the one hand, you know, there is this desire to kind of shout like, hey, pay attention to all these things because everything is important. Like, hey, look at the art, look at the images that we're using. And at the same time, we've really wanted to avoid like over explaining things, you know, because you want people to interpret songs in their own way and make their own meanings, because that's really what art is all about. Right.
Right. Yeah, totally.
So it's like,
no one at the Mona Lisa is like, do you see this brush stroke because it's connected to this, you know, like
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's you know, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, of course, the most important thing for us as artists is whether we feel like we achieved what we set out to do. And I think in you know, as far as that question is concerned, the answer is an unqualified yes. Like I could look back on this record. Well, you know, hopefully I'll be able to look back on this record when I'm old. And I think that'll be the case. Even if I don't even if my feelings towards like the actual execution of the ideas starts to sour, or even if like the sound or like the decisions that we made fall out of favor with us, I think we'll still be able to say, even though our tastes have changed, we know that we accomplished what we set out to do.
Yes.
So, there's really nothing more you could ask for.
Yeah. So Mark, before we start to head towards the close, you guys got some shows coming up. Where are you going, and what do you want to plug when it comes to that?
Sure. So we are gonna just do a short 8-day tour with Islet, who are this screamo hardcore band from Baltimore, Maryland. We're starting.
They played 2019 of New Friends, right?
They did. Yeah.
I'm like, I have a set of theirs on the channel somewhere, but yeah.
Yep, they played 2019. Great band, even better people. We played with them in Baltimore back in February when we were doing the 10-day tour. So I'm really excited to hit the road with them. I feel like we all hit it off, and it's gonna be exciting. Hopefully they can withstand us for that long. But yeah, we're going out there. The whole reason for the tour is ZBR Fest, which is happening in Chicago on May 6th and 7th this year.
Cool.
After ZBR, we're going to be playing in Indianapolis at Healer DIY. We're playing in Beverly, Michigan, which is outside Detroit, if I'm not mistaken, at this like video game store. We're doing
cool.
Yeah, I'm really stoked. We're doing Akron, Ohio, which we've played a couple times. Both times have been great. At Musica, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at a place called Venia. And then we're ending it with a simple, solid, tried and true Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey trifecta.
Okay.
Which I'm very stoked for. Yeah.
Very cool. So I think this episode will probably be out on the 9th of May.
Okay.
So I think that will kind of be like mid-tour for y'all. So if anyone's listening and you're in any of those areas and, it's not past the date, I would highly recommend y'all check it out. Again, going in very green on New Friends stuff, at least for me back in 2019, like not really knowing what I was getting myself into. Massa NERA, out of, many other bands, but Massa NERA was definitely one that like kind of left me with like some like questions, but in like I'm very intrigued on what's going on here. So I'm hoping that, like it sounds like there's more stuff on the docket, but I'm hoping that we cross paths again sooner than later here, Mark.
I'm sure we will. There is a lot on the docket, like you said, which I'm very excited about. I don't want to say too much because that's no fun. And then if something doesn't happen, then I'll be letting myself down more than anything else.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned before the podcast started that we announced the second record, Dedamad Querer Borrar. Apologies to any Spanish speakers who find fault with my pronunciation. I'm the only non-Spanish speaker in the band, so I did my best there. But we started working on it in like 2018, and we talked about it almost immediately after we started. And then, people knew we were working on it. They were like, where's the record? Someone even called it the Screamo Chinese Democracy.
Oh.
Yeah. So never again. But we, it took us 5 years to put out a second LP. And there was a 3-year gap between when we put out the Frail Body, Infant Island, Diana Krall split and when the record came out. And apparently, I learned this recently at a show, a couple of people even thought that we were inactive, even though we never stopped playing shows. So long story short, we never want there to be a gap like that between releases ever again. And we are working overtime to make sure that's not the case.
Yeah. Smart.
So that's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that some things off air we might share. But Mark, before we let you go,
Yeah.
it's tradition here to end every podcast with a favorite mosh related story. So
Oh shit.
I know that the screamo genre, I wouldn't say that there's no moshing, but I would say it's the ratios or the degrees are a lot different than a normal punk hardcore show. But any mosh story, wholesome, gruesome, happened to you or didn't, a Massa Nera show or not, whatever's
Okay.
first to your head is how we start to end the show.
Oh shit. Well, that's a good question. Like you said, screamo isn't necessarily known for its mosh, even though I feel like things are changing.
There was some stage diving at
Yeah,
2022.
a lot. A
A
lot of
lot,
stage
yeah.
diving, and
I got a few in.
Yeah, and at the risk of sounding arrogant or potentially delusional, if I'm incorrect, as I recall, the stage diving started during our set.
I think you might be right.
Yeah. So I'm very happy about that. Thank you to whoever did that.
Good flex there.
Yes, but
we broke the glass.
yeah. With that being said, the best mosh story I have actually comes from a show I went to when I was about 16, a Real Big Fish show, believe it or not. Yes. Yes. So
wait, Real Big Fish is the ska band, right?
Indeed, the one, one and the same.
Jordan, producer of this show, big Real Big Fish fan. Are you not, Jordan? Am I?
Yeah. Shout out ska.
Okay. Yeah.
I finally get to say it on the podcast.
Well, I'm happy.
There are
nothing else I
many
provided
many jokes about ska that Jordan and I have, but yeah.
Hey, you know what? Say what you will about ska and the cliche of every high schooler in the United States and beyond wanting to start a ska band at least once, but some of the best shows I went to in my formative music listening years were ska shows, so no shame. But at this particular show, so I don't know if you ever saw them live or if you listened to their double disc live LP.
I am unfortunately just one of those people that heard the one song that everyone knows 1,000 times versus let's listen to the double live LP.
Well, at the risk of exposing myself,
no, I appreciate you giving me the benefit of the doubt, but
yeah, at one time I was really into Real Big Fish, right? And they I'm looking it up right now just so I could be as accurate as possible, right? They released in 2006 an album called Our Live Album is Better Than Your Live Album, a double disc behemoth, right? And on that record, they play a version of the song SR, which they originally put out on the record Turn the Radio Off, right? So on that album, it's the studio version of the song. It's just like a 1.5-minute ska song. Pretty straightforward, right? So live, what they do, probably because the song is so short, after they play the ska version, they'll play 5, 6, 7, or however many alternate versions of the song, each one corresponding to a different genre of music.
Oh. Interesting.
So like
okay.
A punk version, a country version, an emo quote unquote version, etc., etc.
Okay.
So fast forward to 2010 or so. I'm at the Starland Ballroom in Sayreville, New Jersey. They play SR, and I'm like, fuck yeah. I can't wait to hear all of the different versions of this song. It's going to be sick. And
so you knew this going into it?
I did. I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I was real into Real Big Fish. Like, I wish I wasn't, but I was. So, before each version, they would introduce it with the dance associated with that style of music.
Okay.
So they play the ska version, then they play the punk version, and they're like, "Hey, this is the punk version. Start a circle pit." So whatever. Then they played like a dance version, and they mentioned some dance, right? Whatever. So then they play the country version. And
I was gonna say, did they say do-si-do it up or
square
what?
dance?
Okay,
they were like
dancing.
fucking square dance, and literally on cue, some person I never met. She like latched arms with me and we square danced, and it was honestly quite lovely. And immediately afterwards, they were like, okay, here's the fucking death metal version.
Oh.
And they launch into, honestly, an extremely passable death metal rendition of the song, complete with Cookie Monster gutturals. And these fucking burly ass dudes who looked like they were airdropped from a Slayer show just like launched themselves into what used to be a square dancing circle and started beating the shit out of each other.
That is amazing.
Yep.
I love the contrast of everyone having like cowboy hats on and then getting those knocked off because there's a 300-pound like titan swinging for their life.
Exactly. Like
That's
fucking
hilarious.
Hammer Smashed Face was playing or something. It was so jarring that even me, like someone who listened to fucking Mr. Bungle, like I couldn't process the tonal whiplash that was happening. Needless to say, I never saw that square dancing partner again.
Yeah, that was probably the last time that they did that. It was like, that was too much of a contrast. But damn.
Yeah, but yes, that's the best mosh story that I have. You know, I don't know if that's a good story, but
it was. It's funny that you asked if it was good or not, because there's been a long time running thing, because I do this for every single interview, and there's been a long time running thing that I still want to eventually do. And I've been talking about this for years on the show, but I want to have someone take these stories and do like either an animated, like very like 2-dimensional stick figure kind of adaptation, or like an actual comic strip of that, because people painting these, you've painted it perfectly, so that is definitely one that will be making its debut.
Oh man, honestly, that's
no doubt in my mind.
That's a fucking great idea, though. That really is. That and the like, you know, collection of, or an episode dedicated to Canadian bands playing in or trying to play in the US. Those are the
we're coming up with all the ideas here.
Exactly. Those are the moneymaker ideas. I will accept a 5% cut, of course, on any
I mean, I'll show you a check if it pops.
No.
I won't hold you out.
No, but honestly, I think that's a great idea too. I would love to see something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure the stories that you've heard I'm sure some of them are absolutely absurd.
Yes, very much so. And you know, it's a pleasure to have friends that I've made through the years of Scoped on the pod, but it's an extra pleasure for people to feel comfortable to tell me either the most fucked up mosh related things that they've experienced or seen. Sometimes borderline incriminating, but hilarious nonetheless. Mark, it's been really great to see you, chat with you, learn a little bit more of your story and your history and your lore. All of your links for the bands that you're a part of, as well as your personal, will be in the description and in the show notes. Anything you want to plug, anything you want to shout out, or anything you want to send the people off with?
Let me think. Well, obviously, if you weren't familiar with us before and you somehow stomached my incessant rambling and are now interested in the music that we make, Massa Nera, my band, our new record, it's available on our Bandcamp. Zegema Beach Records helped us put it out. They still have copies as well. We do have a lot of shows planned between now and like August, so I can't imagine all of the copies are going to last long, at least on our end. So, pick one up or whatever.
Buy that shit.
Yeah. Beyond that, I have another project called Our Wits, which, I mentioned earlier in the episode. We haven't done anything in a while, but we are working on a lot of new music as well. So I guess
cool.
If you want to check out our previous record, or at least like write us down in like a note on your phone or whatever, like feel free to do that. But beyond that, I think more than anything else, if you're listening to this episode and you're new to Screamo or newish and you're interested in learning more about it, just there are countless bands, past and present, that have been playing this sort of music with their own spin that are incredible on a musical level, on an artistic level, and on a personal level. And the subgenre as a whole has a really rich tradition of emotionally raw and politically thoughtful music. So I'd recommend just diving deep. Go to Zegum Beach Records Bandcamp, go to Middleman Records Bandcamp, I Corrupt, etc., and just select 5 records at random and press play, because there's a lot going on. And of course, collectives like New Friends DIY, who are really building something special.
Beautifully said. Great call out to acquire new screamoians. I don't know if that's the right.
Yeah, screamoites.
Screamoites. That's good. Yeah, and maybe I can be an honorary screamoite, I guess. Yeah, it's been really cool to see not only you guys but a bunch of awesome bands through New Friends. New Friends is happening again in 2023. So now that I'm based here in Eastern Canada, at least for a time, I'm definitely going to be down there myself. But Mark, thank you again for joining me today and just having a wonderful conversation. This was really fun.
No, I agree. Thank you. This was honestly an absolute pleasure. I'm really happy that we were able to make this work.
Yes.